I'm so grateful that you're both alive, but I'm also sad that my kids didn't survive. I would give anything to be able to go and hold them and tell them that I love them and be a part of their life.
Melissa Oden, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Can you share your experience with abortion?
My experience is one that our culture tries to silence and even shame. I am one of those babies who survived my own abortion. My birth mother was a 19-year-old college student back in 1977 when she was forced to undergo a saline infusion abortion. During that procedure, I soaked in the toxic salt solution of it for 5 days. We know that through my medical records, it lasted longer than what it was intended to. I now know during those 5 days, they started to suspect my birth mom might lose her life as well. Another inconvenient truth about abortion. And I am so grateful that even though I was poisoned and scalded over that 5-day period, on the final 5th day when they successfully induced her labor, instead of being expelled from the womb as a successful abortion, as our world would call it, I was accidentally born alive.
How old were you when that abortion was attempted on your life?
My medical records state that the abortionist thought my birth mom was between 18 and 20 weeks pregnant, but when I was ultimately whisked off to the NICU, a neonatologist remarked I looked like I was about 31 weeks.
Do you have any injuries from enduring 5 days of saline solution as a preborn baby?
When I was rushed to the NICU, I weighed a little less than 3 pounds. I was 2 pounds, 14 ounces. I suffered from severe respiratory and liver problems. I was suffering from seizures for an extended period of time. Now that I look at my medical records, I now know they thought I had a fatal heart defect initially because I presented with so much distress, and understandably so after soaking in this solution for 5 days. They were very guarded about what my future might hold, but still today, I am quote unquote healthy. Most of my injuries would be emotional, mental, spiritual. Certainly living in the culture that we do takes those wounds and keeps bringing them to the forefront. And that's normal for so many survivors that I know.
What happened after your birth? Were you adopted? Did your birth mother raise you?
I'm sort of the poster child of what most people think a born alive infant is, born in the final step of my own abortion procedure, and that is indeed who many of us are. But there are lots of survivors who are just a continuing pregnancy that we don't even know about. A woman will carry an abortion survivor for weeks or sometimes months before that child is born. In my circumstances, I was placed for adoption. You know, my story is very unique in many ways because I now know my birth mother did not know that I had survived her abortion for over 30 years.
They never told your own birth mother that you were alive?
The day that they induced her labor, they told her it had been successful. They said, it's hideous, it's a monster, don't look at it. She didn't know if I was a little boy or a little girl. Her family knew that the abortion had failed, and I will probably never know how I ultimately was placed for adoption, but what I do know is that my mom and dad first met me when I was still lying in an incubator full of tubes and wires fighting for my life. And my mom and dad loved me into life.
Was that legal, do you know, for them to have an abortion surviving infant that is the biological child of the woman and not even tell her that the child will be adopted out?
What's fascinating is that there is a signature on the adoption paperwork that is not my birth mother's signature. Wow. So there's a lot to unpack there. And certainly from a family standpoint, there were a lot of secrets. My maternal grandmother was a prominent nurse. That's how this secret forced abortion took place, bypassing hospital regulations and procedures. But I can tell you, Lila, that I hear from women all the time who have similar stories, and women who will reach out and say, can you help me find out if my child survived my abortion?
You mentioned emotional, spiritual, I think mental injuries. Can you share more about that and what you've experienced?
I found out my story when I was 14 by a complete and utter accident, and every survivor finds out their story in a different way in a different time. It's never easy. But that's part of, I think, the redemptive work that I get to do with the Abortion Survivors Network is we support biological parents who raise their survivor. We support adoptive parents because we don't have to struggle in silence with hard stories. It's healing and it's empowering, not just for the survivor, but for everybody impacted when we talk about it. So for me, I think a lot of my pain came from the fact that back then, we didn't talk about the fact that babies survived abortions. There was really nobody out there besides Gianna Jessen that I first knew about. But it took me about 5 years in my healing before I ever found out there was someone else like me. And I can tell you that there is nothing more beautiful for me right now than to be sent pictures of young abortion survivors, and they're watching us on TV, and they get to see people like them for the first time. So for me, that brings incredible healing to myself, and that's how we shift what's happened in our culture. But for me, it was a place of incredible shame to find out that I was an abortion survivor.
Why?
Because of what our culture says about abortion, that it's someone else's choice, it's someone else's right. And if that is talked about as such, what does that mean for those of us that survive? We were someone else's choice, we were someone else's right. Our death was someone else's right. And when we live in a culture that then heaps more shame by saying, you know what, abortion survivors don't exist. You guys just wanted to be famous. You are these Republican-made figments to attack women's reproductive rights. It bears on your identity time and time again.
Did you feel shame for being alive?
Such guilt. The guilt of, why me and not them?
Them?
Them, the tens of millions of children who didn't survive. And even from the standpoint of being healthy, why? I mean, it's a blessing, right? It's this double-edged sword. I'm so grateful. I would not change who I am. But at the end of the day, it's really hard to separate the two. My greatest joy is my greatest pain.
Did you feel rejection from your mother, your birth mother?
I felt it inside. My relationship with my biological family now is so incredibly beautiful. My birth mom is a huge part of my life. But I think what we need to recognize, and research tells us this, that babies in the womb experience the stress that their mothers go through. So we think about women like my birth mom who go through the stress of crisis and then abortion. And so I felt that stress. Then I go through the stress of being poisoned and scalded. Then I go through the stress of a stay in the NICU, right? I had all this stress. And so it essentially rewires me in many ways. And again, I know this about myself, so I get to use it for good. But it is this deep-seated fight or flight that was turned on. And again, I see this in survivors, but it's also this piece of us that knows inherently that something so terrible happened to us. And so that's really part of our healing process, is recognizing how that impacts us physically and emotionally and mentally and spiritually, so that as we heal, we can be as whole as we ever will be and deal with that rejection that still will always be this little tiny piece of me.
What did it feel like when you first felt that rejection? You discovered at age, as a young teen, that an abortion had been attempted on your life.
Like a bomb went off. I was raised to know I was adopted. You know, I can't tell you when I first found out my story. My mom and dad just did an amazing job of helping my older sister, who's also adopted, helping us know that adoption was a blessing to them and to us, and that our birth parents loved us. This wasn't a case of not being loved. They simply couldn't care for us. And so when I found out that they had attempted that abortion, it felt like everything I had been told about my life wasn't true. And that is to no fault of my parents. They were doing the best they could with what they had. And so to find out that truth, it was like every piece of me, everything I ever knew about myself was gone, and I stood on this shaky ground, and I was so afraid of anybody knowing my story. I told a handful of people that I could trust, but it didn't take long for me to go away to college and receive just that message that my story was not welcome. And when you tell an abortion survivor, either explicitly or implicitly, that their story is not welcome, what you're communicating is they are not welcome. And so that's where that rejection comes in, when we are such a dreaded complication to the abortion industry, and then our culture receives that message, and the media has accepted that lie. Survivors can't even scroll social media, turn on the news, and not face this kind of information. Think about our youngest survivors. I mean, we have 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 18-year-olds, even younger, right? All across the continuum. What kind of message are these children receiving? Not just about abortion, but about who they are. To me, that's such an injustice.